An ordinary grocery trip turns into a moment no one will ever forget. What started as just another shopping trip quickly turned into something unforgettable when an elderly woman told a young black man to go back to Africa. What he said next didn't just quiet the store. It changed everything. The grocery store was buzzing with the usual sounds of busy shoppers. People pushed their carts down the aisles, some lost in their own thoughts, others chatting quietly as they picked out what they needed. It was a bright, sunny afternoon in a small Ohio neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone seemed to know each other. But today, the usual routine would be interrupted in a way no one saw coming. Near the fruit section, an older woman, probably in her late 70s, stood adjusting her glasses. She muttered to herself impatiently as she reached for a bag of apples. Wearing a faded cardigan and with silver hair neatly pinned back, she looked like anyone's grandmother, harmless and ordinary. But what happened next was anything but ordinary. A young black man, tall and casually dressed in a blue hoodie and jeans, walked up to the nearby oranges. His name was Daryl. He moved calmly, blending easily into the flow of the store. With one hand, he balanced a basket full of groceries while texting on his phone with the other. That's when it happened. The elderly woman turned sharply and noticed Daryl. Her face changed immediately, her eyes narrowed, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "You people don't belong here," she said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Daryl froze, his fingers still hovering over his phone. He looked up, confused, just as she spoke again, her voice even sharper. "Why don't you go back to Africa where you came from?" The energy in the store shifted. A few shoppers stopped moving. Some looked away awkwardly, others exchanged uncomfortable glances. The noise of the store seemed to die out, replaced by a heavy silence. At first, Daryl looked shocked. He frowned, and for a second, it seemed like he might respond right away. But instead, he paused. He took a deep breath, his face giving nothing away, as if he was carefully choosing his next move. The elderly woman stood there firmly, still holding her apples, not backing down. The tension around them was thick, and everyone nearby could feel it. A young mother hurried her child down another aisle. An older man by the potatoes nervously watched Daryl, waiting to see what he would do. The silence grew heavier, almost unbearable. Daryl stayed perfectly still for a moment, his hand tight on his basket. It felt like the whole world had stopped moving around him. The woman's hateful words hung in the air like a bad smell no one could ignore. The woman didn't look sorry. If anything, she stood even taller, daring him to answer back. She tugged her cardigan tighter and lifted her chin. Nearby, a young worker who was stacking bananas froze mid-reach, unsure if he should step in. A cashier stretched her neck to get a better look. No one walked away, but no one got closer either. They were all witnesses now, whether they wanted to be or not. Daryl looked at the woman. His face was calm, but you could see deep thought in his eyes. 1,000 possible replies ran through his mind. He could shout, he could storm out, but none of those felt right. The tension was like a heavy weight pressing down on him, but he didn't break. He simply shifted his basket to his other hand, straightened his shoulders, and seemed to grow taller right there in the silence. When Daryl finally spoke, his voice was calm but strong, cutting through the thick air around them. "Ma'am," he said, his tone even and careful. "Do you even realize what you just said?" His question wasn't angry or harsh. It was thoughtful, almost like he was giving her a chance to think about her own words. But the elderly woman didn't seem interested in thinking about her words. "I said what I said," she snapped, her voice getting louder. "This is my country. People like you don't belong here." That was it. A young woman near the bread aisle gasped out loud, and the quiet murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Still, Daryl stayed steady. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step closer. Instead, He let the silence grow, giving her words time to sink into everyone's ears. "All right," he said finally, nodding slowly. His calmness was powerful, almost unsettling because it was so strong. "Let's talk about that, since you brought it up." The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The storm was coming, but it wasn't the kind anyone expected. Darryl shifted his weight, gently setting his basket down on the floor. His calmness felt like gravity, pulling everyone around him closer, even those pretending not to pay attention. He looked at the elderly woman, not with anger, but with a steady determination that made her shift uneasily. "You said I don't belong here," he began, his voice firm but even. "But let me tell you something about where I come from." Every word he spoke felt heavy, chosen carefully. "My great-great-grandfather was born in Mississippi," he said, pausing so the words could settle. "He was a sharecropper, working land he didn't even own, breaking his back so his children could have a better life." He paused again, letting the truth hang in the air. "His father?" "He was a slave, kidnapped, beaten, sold like property. And for what? To help build the very country you're standing in." The woman's lips pressed into a tight line, but she said nothing. The crowd, though, was locked in, completely focused on Darryl. A man by the dairy section who had been looking at his phone now let it fall to his side. An older couple whispered to each other but didn't look away. "My grandfather," Darryl continued, his voice growing stronger, "fought in World War II, risked his life for a country that sent him to fight, but treated him like dirt when he came home." He spoke without rushing, letting every truth land. He couldn't sit at the same lunch counters. He couldn't drink from the same fountains. But he stayed. You know why? He paused, making sure they heard him. Because he believed in what this country could be, even when it didn't believe in him. A hush fell over the store. Even the buzzing refrigerators seemed to grow quieter. "And my parents," Darryl went on, his tone soft but still powerful, "they fought too, not with fists or guns, but by working every day, raising me to believe in kindness, respect, and hard work." He smiled slightly, remembering. "My mother's a teacher, spent her whole life helping kids no matter what they look like. My father's a mechanic, the kind of man who would pull over on the side of the road to help someone like you if your car broke down." He let the words hang there, his eyes still locked on the woman's. "So when you tell me I don't belong here, that I should go back to Africa," he shook his head slightly, his voice now carrying a heavy sadness. "Ma'am, I am as much a part of this country as you are, maybe even more. Because my family paid for it, with blood, sweat, and tears." The elderly woman's face flushed red. Her hands trembled as she gripped her apples tighter. She opened her mouth, trying to speak, but no words came out. Darryl stood back, his calm never breaking. "I could have walked away," he said, now speaking to everyone around him. "But what would that solve? Silence doesn't fix ignorance. It's up to all of us to be better than this, better than words like those." His words didn't just fill the room. They stayed there, heavy and real. But the story wasn't finished yet, because the way the crowd responded next would say even more. The silence after Darryl's speech was deep, almost deafening. No one moved. The elderly woman's face was full of emotions, anger, embarrassment, and something else, something that almost looked like shame. She looked around, maybe hoping someone would back her up, but no one did. A middle-aged man wearing a baseball cap stepped forward. "He's right," the man said, breaking the silence. "We have to be better than this." His words seemed to break a spell. An older woman near the frozen foods aisle gave a slow nod. "My dad fought in that same war," the elderly woman said softly, her voice shaking. "He always told me. The only color that mattered was the red on the flag." The murmurs around them grew louder. From behind the cashier station, a young girl, barely 20, called out, "I've never seen anyone handle something like that so gracefully." "Thank you." The elderly woman, now clearly flustered, gripped her shopping cart tightly. She didn't apologize, not with words, but the fire in her eyes was gone. When she finally spoke again, her voice was lower, almost pleading. "I didn't mean—" She started but couldn't finish. Darrell turned to face her, his expression softer now. "It's not about what you meant," he said gently. "It's about how it sounded. Words matter. Actions matter even more." A man over by the deli counter started clapping, slowly at first, breaking the thick tension. Others joined in, the sound growing louder, filling the store. They weren't just clapping for Darrell's words, they were clapping for his courage, for standing up against hate with dignity. The elderly woman looked around one last time, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly on the cart. Then, without saying another word, she turned and slowly pushed her cart toward the exit. As she walked away, a few people came over to Darrell. One woman gently placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "Thank you for saying what needed to be said." Darrell gave a small, faint smile. He lifted his basket again and said quietly, "Sometimes it's not about winning or losing. It's about making sure the truth is heard." The crowd started to go back to their shopping, but the feeling in the air had changed. A quiet, thoughtful atmosphere had replaced the earlier tension. Some looked inspired, others looked deep in thought, but everyone seemed touched in some way. The moment had passed, but the impact of Darrell's words would stay much longer. As people returned to their routines, the store felt different, quieter, more respectful. Darrell finished picking up the last of his groceries. His steps were steady, thoughtful, as he processed everything that had just happened. At the checkout line, the same young cashier scanned his items, smiling shyly. "What you said back there?" She paused, gathering courage. "It really meant a lot. Most people wouldn't have handled it like you did, with such grace." Darrell smiled back warmly. "Sometimes," he said, "grace is the only way to break through. Anger just builds more walls." Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. As Darrell walked to his car, he noticed the elderly woman sitting in her own vehicle, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. For a moment, he thought about going over to her, but he decided not to. Some lessons need time to take root, and he had already said all he needed to say. That evening, Darrell sat at the kitchen table with his father, recounting the day's events. His father, a man of few words, listened carefully, his hands folded in front of him. "You did the right thing, son," his father said at last. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone who was watching. People like her, they don't change overnight. But you planted a seed, and sometimes that's all you can do. Plant the seed and let it grow." Darrell nodded, his father's words settling deep inside him. He understood then, the confrontation had been uncomfortable, but necessary. Ignorance doesn't go away on its own. If left unchallenged, it only spreads. It has to be faced, with truth. Meanwhile, across town, the elderly woman sat at her own dining table, staring at a plate of untouched food. Darrell's words echoed in her mind, breaking through walls she hadn't even realized she had built. She thought about her own grandchildren. She thought about the world they were growing up in. And for the first time, she felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. In the days that followed, the story of what happened at the grocery store spread through the community. People talked about Darrell, about how he had stood up, how he had spoken with strength and grace. It wasn't just an incident anymore. It was a lesson. A reminder of how powerful words can be, and how important it is to stand up for what's right. Darrell didn't seek attention. He didn't brag about what he had done. But still, His actions rippled through the town. Strangers came up to him, thanking him, sharing their own stories of facing prejudice and showing resilience. His quiet stand had opened up conversations that had been avoided for too long. Even the elderly woman began to change. Slowly. It wasn't fast. But she started questioning the ideas she had always believed. She didn't know if she would ever meet Daryl again. But if she did, she hoped she would have the courage to say two simple words. I'm sorry. Moments like these remind us of something important. Kindness matters. Strength matters. Truth matters. Standing up doesn't always mean yelling. Sometimes it means speaking calmly, with conviction, and letting the truth speak for itself. To anyone listening, remember, your words and your actions matter. They can hurt, or they can heal. They can divide, or they can bring people together. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Together, we can spread more messages of hope, courage, and understanding, and create a better world for everyone.